Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Quarks and Quarternotes. Today, we will be discussing the question of whether morality is objective. We're very used to disagreeing on this topic, so we start more in the form of debate, but you can see as the conversation continues, we slowly start to align, and it is an interesting exercise of us trying to present things to each other in different ways until we eventually agree. So, the question is morality objective? The only way we can answer this question is by defining what morality is and defining what objective is. What do you think of when I say morality?
I think of how we should act in the world. I think is the best way to put it. In which ways should you act or move about in the world? What action should you take or should you not take?
For me, I would say a similar thing. I would say morality is like the rules that govern good and bad behavior. When you say things you should do, would you say the things you should do are good and the things you shouldn't do are bad, or do you have any difference
Yeah, I
there?
think when you're talking about morality, you can assume something that has to do with like good or bad or right or wrong, something along those lines.
Okay, I know some people don't like the words good, bad, or evil or anything like that. Some people try to just make it like
Right.
prescriptive should, but I am
Right.
okay using it both ways.
Some philosophers, they go beyond good and evil.
So funny. That's a pretty neat reference. Okay, so morality, the rules that govern should and shouldn't, good and bad behavior. Now, what does it mean to you to say objective in this context whenever we ask the question, is morality objective? What does that mean to you?
So, in prepping for this, that was one of the things I was trying to do, and that's a lot trickier question than it seems on the surface, defining what you mean by
I think
objective.
objective is maybe one of the most slippery terms that you can find in philosophy.
Well, we don't really want to get into the question today, but like, what is objective and what is reality are topics in and of themselves.
Right, right. We're just gonna assume that there is a reality of some kind.
It's tricky to put your finger on what you mean by
Like, what do
objective.
you think
I
of?
Something probably independent of my subjective awareness or something like that.
Okay, so like Kantian type of objectivity, where it's like the world exists even if you're not aware of it.
Yeah, or maybe it exists even if I weren't here or something like that. Things are objective if it's true independent of a subject of some
Of
sorts.
like
Say,
perception.
yeah, something like that.
2 + 2 = 4, even if nobody knows about it.
Right.
Okay.
This is where it gets tricky though, because it's like blue, like the color blue.
Hmm.
Does it exist objectively? There's definitely light that corresponds to that frequency, but blue, the experience, seems to be pretty subjective. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I would call blue, the experience of it, I would call that subjective experience.
Right. But it's definitely real.
Well, you
Like,
can make that's where the subjective difference can be, because some people will say like they'll use objective a little more casually, and like you're not being objective about that. You're being biased. You're not really thinking clearly, and you're just going based off of what's on going on in your head. But I think when we're
mhm.
talking about objective as it exists independent of what others might think, I think you can still talk about objectivity in something like color. I don't want to get too. I mean, I guess we do have to kind of
Yeah.
pin this down. So I would say the experience of blue is a subjective experience in terms of it's like it's not an experience that you can say happens outside of your perception because it only happens within your perception. So we can't say 2 + 2 = 4 even if you don't know about that. You can't say that you are seeing blue even though you don't know about it. It is like a subjective thing, but you can make objective claims about it, like I see blue when this frequency of light hits my eye.
Or just like, I can see blue, something like that.
That would be an objective claim in my view.
Okay.
Does that do we line up there, or
Yeah, I think so. It's just really tricky to, and even if you go like into like trying to read about it, there's like a dictionary definition, and there's like philosophy definitions which are way different and more drawn out, and they look at every little possible aspect of what you could say about the word.
Well, do you personally think that anything can be objective?
Yes,
In the sense
I
of
think so.
like mathematical objectivity where it's true even if somebody doesn't know or thinks that it's something else.
Yeah. Well, when I'm doing physics, I certainly think that's the case.
Like we could all think that 2 plus 2 equals 5 and be
And we
wrong
could
about
all
that.
be wrong. Yeah.
But and there's like this objective truth that exists outside of that. Okay.
Hmm.
That is what I'm thinking when I'm talking about objective morals. I'm talking about,
There might be a slight, I don't know if this is important, but distinguish between objective and real, if there is one. Something can something be objectively true but not real in the world? Like not substantiated or physical or something like that. Still be objective.
I mean, I don't know if that applies to this. I can imagine truth claims that could be true about things that aren't real. Like I could tell you lots of true facts about Middle Earth, even though it's not a real place. or what do you mean?
Right. And those would be objectively true.
Yeah, I think it would be
Okay.
similar to like the claims about color. Like you could make an objective claim
Right.
about somebody experiencing something without there being an actual like thing you can touch. But I don't know if that ties into morality, or do you
We'll
think so?
see.
Okay.
It's hard to say, right? Well, let's get into these schools of thoughts that you were talking about. The reason I brought this up because the first one we have on our list is moral realism, and we were talking about objectivity. What is real and what is objective? Slightly different words. You know what I mean?
Like there's a difference between moral realism and moral objectivism, or what do you mean?
Right. Can you have like a moral framework with like a bunch of truth claims, but they're not like physical or real or substantiated in the universe somehow?
So for our first category, moral realism, and this is where I stand, you are taking the position that your moral claims relate to objective features of the world that are true, independent of opinion, just like a mathematical truth. So there are three answers to this question, right? Is morality objective? So do these principles of good and bad, are there true and false ones that exist outside of like subjectivity? You can either say yes, you can say no, or you can say like something else. There are a few ways you can say something else. But moral realism, that's where you say yes. These are true, and there are different ways you can say this is true. And then you have moral relativism, where you can say it's relatively true. It's true relative to the subjects and the context. You could say no or that you doubt it. I think there's some other answers to that. But what is your intuition before we go? We can break into these a little more specifically, but what is your position on the question, is morality objective?
I feel like when it comes to morality, it seems like there isn't morality that is true or objective in the sense that physics equations are true and objective. They relate to and govern action in the world of different material objects. And when we're talking about morality, I think there are, I don't want to say correct, but there's like better and worse moralities. There's better and worse ways to act in the world. And I feel like it's part of our responsibility to kind of talk to each other, maybe look within ourselves and figure out which one of these is better or worse. And the only way we can judge this is just with our moral intuitions.
So, if you would reject that there's like an objective standard of morals that exists outside of our moral intuitions, how can you say that some are better or worse?
This is the tricky part, right? Is where I'm getting at. So I would say we can build ethical systems or something, but I think that we should always be open to the possibility that we haven't got it right. I'm not even sure if there is a end goal. Like if there is a final book to be written on ethics, I feel like it's more of a process than anything, that it's just constantly updating itself, right?
Yeah, like science.
Right, but with science, we go out there and say we have some like scientific theory that we want to test. We go out there and we look at the world essentially, and we compare what we see in the world, compare that to our theory or our equations or whatever, and then we can match that one to one. And when it comes to morality, it's way trickier because the subjective aspect can't be ignored when we're talking about morality, because it's really the root of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we had no kind of subjective experience, I don't think we'd be talking about morality. So yeah, of course it's important.
I do think you can make moral claims and you can have justifications and reasons for them.
But you said you want to be open to the possibility that we don't get it right. So what
Yes.
is right?
See, this is, I think right is, you have to a little bit rely on your intuitions here. We all, I think inherently we all have like a sense of like good and bad or right and wrong. Like it's pretty deep within us. If we do something and you're like you're immediate aware of it, it's like in the back of your head you're like, I shouldn't have done that. Like that's those kind of intuitions, I feel like should whenever we're constructing our morals or
This is interesting because how do you decide which of these kinds of intuitions you follow and which ones you don't? Because you can have very strong moral intuitions to like punch someone in the face when they do something wrong to you.
right. Well, I think it's important that we talk with other people. I think it would be impossible to set up a moral or ethical framework like essentially by yourself, if that makes sense. I think morality is inherently tied to like not just action in the world, but like action towards other beings in the world, right?
Right. Well, maybe I'm going to explain real quickly how I approach this, and you can tell me where I think our intuitions diverge at some point, but I don't know where exactly. I more or less agree with you. We have to talk about it and such, and we have to find what's more right and such. But I feel like the only way we can do that is if there is a right answer, and I feel like there must be right answers, even though we're talking about subjective experience. Like we said before, we can make objective claims about subjective experience. And given that our minds are, we talked earlier about math describing physics, and how it can describe it accurately. And you said morality isn't quite like a physics equation, but I feel like given that our minds are physical objects, or at least they directly relate to physical objects, everything about your mind, virtually anything you can imagine, has a physical component to it. Your memories, your all your experiences, and they can be interrupted when you're sick and when you're uncomfortable. Your mental state is changed by these physical components of the world. And if that is the case, if our minds are completely constrained to the physical world, it is in some sense a slave to the laws of nature. And if that's the case, I don't see how it can't not relate one to one with physical truths about the world, given that it is entirely physical.
Well, we've reached sort of a famous impasse brought initially by David Hume. We're riding on the edge of the is ought gap right now. We're talking about what the world is and what we are, and we're trying to give a framework on what we ought to do or how we ought to act in the world. It seems very hard, at least for me. It seems like a logical impossibility to describe the world like these descriptive words of physics and such, of like what the world is, and then getting from that what we ought to do or how we ought to act.
That isn't really what I'm saying. I'm not saying that because we can like describe ourselves physically accurately and such, or if we accumulate enough knowledge, that we suddenly know what we ought to do. I'm really saying that because everything about our subjectivity is constrained to the physical world, there have to be truths about it. There have to be like mathematical truths about it, more or less. It has to be true that putting your hand on a stove is a negative experience. Like that has to be
W-
true.
There's there's a slight assumption there, and we're saying that like negative experiences like is bad or something like. We have to assume that negative experience is bad.
What would you say is bad?
So I'm fine with the or assuming that like pain or suffering or something like that is bad.
Well, what would you say is the purpose of morality?
I would say morality. The purpose of morality is to. It's like a guideline to for action in the world, like I said.
But why do you want a guideline for action in the world? Like, what is it guiding you to?
Well,
What is this guideline to?
well, you see, that's the thing. I'm not so sure there's like an end goal, right? Whenever it comes to this,
Well, how can, if you have no sort of goal, how can you be guided to anything?
we can be guided away from the bad things,
What are the
whatever
bad
those
things?
are. I don't know. Some of like my initial intuitions would be like murder or
And what makes murder bad?
to me, what makes murder bad is that if I murdered someone, I would feel bad about it.
So you want to avoid bad feelings.
Something like that.
And so you might say the objective of morality, maybe I shouldn't use the word objective, the goal of morality is to avoid the bad feelings?
No, 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 no.
No? Okay.
Right. The goal of morality is to tell you how you should
How you
act in
should
the
act,
world.
right? And I asked you what determines how you should act, and you said you're moving away from the bad. I asked you what's bad, and
Something like
you
that.
said something like murder.
Well, it's like, what should you move toward? I don't even know if it's like move away from the bad is correct. It's like what should you or where should you move towards? Or like
Sure. Okay. Tell me.
how ought you act? I don't know. That's the hard part.
I don't know. I feel like you're agreeing with me that so you don't agree that morality is about moving away from bad to good. If not, we need to redefine morality so I understand what you mean by it.
I mean, that seems fine to me. Like morality, well, maybe distinguishing between what bad and good is.
So, okay, so we talked about morality being principles of good and bad, right or wrong. So let's figure out what we mean by good and bad. So, what is bad?
So I feel like whenever it comes to these kind of questions, we have to use our moral intuitions. Like we have a sense of what's good and bad, I think, before we even have this conversation. That sense, the internal sense that we have is what I mean when it comes to like good. We really have to defer to our moral intuitions here.
I mean, when I ask you things about mathematics,
Well, I can give you like a whole bunch of specifics, but it's like, or I can give you a whole bunch of like examples, but it's harder to like nail down exactly what is similar between all of them,
well, we could
right?
try.
Well, I mean, there's like a million, like essentially all the laws that we have in place, or at least a whole bunch of them. I feel like it would be bad to break them. Like I said, murder I think is bad or something. And this is all coming from like moral intuitions. I don't think murder is bad because it's illegal. I think it's bad because if I see someone dead, I feel bad. Or like if I were to murder someone, I could imagine that it would make me feel bad.
Right. So this is where I'm getting at and why I think I think it's an objective truth that murdering someone is going to make you feel bad. And I don't mean that in like
Right.
a
But that's not to say that murdering someone is objectively
no,
bad.
well, it is. Well, for human beings with minds like ours. Right?
It definitely seems bad. I would say that, yes. But I'm not so sure I could put
You can't
the full objective claim
we
on
can't
top of
say
that.
that anything with 100% certainty, you could
Right.
I mean, our best descriptions of like quantum mechanics, I mean, they're incredibly accurate, but you can never say like 100% sure we got it right, everything's right. There's no way any of this could ever be wrong, and we're never going to get better than this. This is true. It's more like this is our best guess right now, and it's working pretty well, right?
In my view, like physics has like it's substantial in a different kind of way. Like it holds up by itself sort of a little bit more.
It holds up once you give in to a few assumptions, like that the laws of logic work,
Right.
that you can trust some of your perceptual senses.
Well, we had to figure out what assumptions we're talking about when it comes to like good and
Yeah,
bad.
you said that you're founding them on your moral intuitions, right?
In part, yeah, and others.
Do you think it's possible to be wrong about some of your moral intuitions?
Yes. That's why I think talking about them is important.
Right. Talking about and so you're not someone who says it's relative then. You're not someone who says it's relevant to the context and the people at the time and place.
No. No, I would say so. So I would say something like a moral relativist. They they would say that certain countries or cultures, they or all cultures have some sort of like moral ethical framework that they abide by, that they live by,
Mhm.
and it's true relative to their culture. Like that the you can't really judge the culture because whatever morals they have are just relative to their time and place, right? So it's similar. I feel like our what we think about ethics and morality will change over time, and we should update our what we think is good and bad. But I feel like I still have grounds to, they say, judge other places. Like, whereas a moral relativist, they wouldn't be able to judge like a different society or different culture or something because it would just be relative to them.
Given that you don't agree that there's an objective 2 plus 2 equals 4 type of right answer to morality,
Hmm.
how can you judge a culture? What makes your opinion more valid than theirs?
Well, I have reasonable justifications for like some of my morals. So like for a moral relativist, if you have a culture or society that like sacrifices children or something like that, the moral relativist couldn't put judgment onto that culture for doing that kind of practice because to them that's just like morality is relative. I feel like I would be able to judge them. Like I can still say that sacrificing your child or whatever is like a bad thing.
But
And I have reasonable justifications for saying that.
so the way I'm looking at this is I could say 2 plus 2 equals 4, and I can reason why that is so. And I could see another culture saying that 2 plus 2 equals 5. I could be like, hey, no, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Here are my reasons for it. This is how it works. And that makes sense to me. Now, if you reject that morality works that way, how can you show them if they're not saying 2 plus 2 equals 5, they're just saying we like to do this and we think this is right. How do you give them a new, more correct answer if there really isn't a proper correct that exists?
I'm not sure. That's a hard question.
So you're not a moral relativist.
No.
Neither am I. There's moral skepticism, which is just the doubt that there are any true moral claims. Would you put yourself there? You just have a heavy doubt for it?
I'm not entirely sure about moral skepticism. I haven't read much on it.
You don't have to describe it or anything. I'm asking you really what you think. Are you simply skeptical that there are true moral claims, or do you think there actually aren't any, or some other alternative?
So this is a little bit what I was talking about earlier when it comes to what is objective and what is real. I think you can make like objective moral claims or something like that. But I'm unsure if they are real and substantiated in the world like the laws of physics. Like the laws of physics are objective and real because I can like do experiments to test them. I think morals are perhaps objective. I'm unsure if they are like real in that
Well,
sense.
we can do some experiments, right?
Sure, like what?
There'd be problematic ethics with this, but we could have two groups of people. One says that keep making murder illegal is better for society, and then another side society could say no, letting people murder as they please makes for a better society. You set up both societies, you let them run, and you see who has greater well-being at the end.
Okay, so for that to work, we have to assume that well-being is what we're working towards, or that well-being is
Okay,
good.
so when you say you do think you can make objective claims, but you don't know if they're real. When you say that,
Yeah, like a truth
okay,
claim,
so
right?
how do you make a truth claim about morality?
Well, you say something like this is bad,
Okay,
like
okay,
murder is
murder's
bad.
bad.
That's a truth claim,
Okay,
right? And I
how is
have
that true?
like, and I have, I have reasons and like justifications,
Okay,
right?
give me some of your reasons.
Well, I can borrow from Kant here
Okay.
and say like that if everyone murdered, then there would be no one left.
Okay, so here's your science experiment. You set up a society where you make it an unbreakable rule that nobody can ever murder anybody. You set up another society that makes another rule that says everyone should murder everyone all the time. And you see what happens.
How do you do that though?
Like you can put them on
Like
separate
even
islands.
in yeah, that's not practical.
Okay, we could set well, I'm not saying it's
Like we're trying to
practical,
get
but
we're let's try to get to like actual real we're a little bit in fantasy land trying to create these different societies. I don't know where I don't know like surely that's possible like in principle, but like there's no way we could set up these other and that's a little bit what we've been doing in all of human history is we've had these little societies here and there and they've all had different cultures or norms or whatever, and as we've interacted across the globe we've had to these norms have kind of rubbed against each other, right? We've had to figure out which ones are better or worse or whatever,
how is that not the equivalent of experimentation?
because you can't really do that like.
Well, you just explained how we kind of have.
But yeah, but you're talking about like setting up two different societies, one in which murder it's a strict law that murder is not allowed, and like you can somehow enforce that like fully. That's not practical. You're not
I'm
going
not
to do
saying it's
that. You know
practical.
what I'm
And in
saying?
fact, my argument isn't that morals are objectively true in practice. I'm only arguing that they are true in principle. I don't know if we can ever know. I doubt we'll ever know the actual true must be true moral axioms that are true for all conscious beings with minds like ours all the time. I don't even know if we'll ever find that, but I they do seem like they must exist.
Why is that?
My whole argument before, given that our minds are purely physical, they have to follow the laws of physics. They have to relate with the physical world around us in a certain way, and there are simply truths to be known about how that
Right.
works.
Well, see, my counter with that too would be like if they're so assuming we had a perfect physics of some sort, you wouldn't need morality. There would be no morality. You would just have the laws of physics.
No. Morality is talking about like a slightly different level, but it's still bound to the laws of physics. It would be a mistake to talk about morality in terms of physics.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we should talk about morality in terms of physics.
I feel like physics tells us what is and what does
Mhm.
happen, and morality is about like what we ought to do. Like, sure, physics grounds reality or whatever. Because physics has rules or whatever that governs us, I don't think that necessarily says that morality has the same kind of like structure or whatever.
Let me present this way, and you can tell me what's you find wrong with it. We live in a world where if you have the proper kind of triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and that's how it works in this universe. Things could be different, and it could be a different sort of way it could work, but that's how it works here. This is just an analogy to that now. Our brains are constructed in a certain way to where we have certain moral intuitions, things, and that's true here in this universe. It could be different in another universe, but that's just how it is here. Thus, it seems to me there must be some equivalent to a squared plus b squared equals c squared in relation to how our brains function in this world.
Well, my objection to that is simply of the 2000 years philosophy has been around, there has been nothing in philosophy as like guidelines or whatever, however we want to call this, that are as tight and neat as, say, the laws of physics.
To say that we haven't done a great job figuring it out, or we haven't figured it out, that's not an argument that it's not true.
It's not a great argument, but it is one. Because physics is like a quarter of the age as philosophy, and we have some really, really good reasons to believe that the laws of physics, the physics equations that we use, are true and correct, objective, and real. And we've been doing philosophy for about 4 times longer, and we still can't seem to have these underlying true, objective, and real, like at bottom claims or something like that. You know what I mean? I feel like we can talk about it and we can come up with new ones.
Okay, I mean, let's just start with like one of the basic principles of utilitarianism. So, like, unnecessary suffering is bad. What is your objection to that?
Well, utilitarianism is saying that like there's inherent to all
No, I
people
just want to talk about this one
there's like a
assumption
bit
real
of,
quick.
I don't know if that's a utilitarian assumption though.
Okay, well, this is me presenting you with something I think is like an objective.
Suffering is bad, I think is an assumption.
Yeah, and
Given
I
that assumption, we can talk about different rules and stuff that we should do to avoid suffering. But that's not to say that suffering is objectively bad.
well, we have to make assumptions. We have to make assumptions to understand the laws of physics.
Right.
Why
So
can you
if we assume suffering is bad, then we can talk about different moral frameworks and ways we ought to act in the world to perhaps avoid suffering. But we have to have it on the table that suffering being bad is an assumption.
do you have a good argument against suffering being bad?
No.
Do you have a good argument against 1 plus 1 equaling 2?
No.
Can you conceive of a good argument against either of them?
Against, well, see, 1 plus 1 equals 2. I'm assuming something like the real numbers exist and they
Yeah, I'm not
have.
talking about the symbols. I'm talking about like the
Right,
abstract
right.
principles.
Right. I'm assuming that the real numbers exist and there's some operator known as addition that works on the reals. And whenever you use this addition property on 1 and 1, you get 2.
Yeah, and there's really no way to justify that process. You do have to sort
Well,
of.
it's justified through the way the real numbers work with that addition operator. So assuming the real numbers exist
Mhm.
and they have different operators, addition and multiplication. So assuming those, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Like that, it has to be that way. There is no. Okay, so whenever it comes to suffering, we can say suffering is bad. We can assume suffering is bad.
Mhm.
And from that, we should not cause suffering in the world. Like,
So
right?
these claims, though, in some sense, in my mind, are equivalently true. Now, I'm asking for you to say why the 1 plus 1 is objectively true outside of our opinions, but not that suffering is bad.
1 plus 1 is true given the real numbers and an addition operator. Like it can't be any other way, right?
But you could still have someone walk in and be like, I don't believe you. 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2. I just saw
Well,
two
I would
lions
look at
go
their
into.
assumptions. Like, are you assuming the real numbers exist? Like, first of all, are you assuming that we have an operator that we can put onto the real numbers? Because once we have that, there are no more assumptions. Like, we've assumed the real numbers, we've assumed these operators, and then from that is like mathematics, right?
I'll make it even more simple. Like, I see a lion go into a cave, And then I see another lion a little bit later go into that cave, and you turn to me and you say, there are 2 lions in that cave. And I say, no, there aren't. There are 3 lions in that cave. So is objective. There is a true answer, and both of us can't be right. One of us is right, the other one is wrong. And we
Right. Well,
can
that's not a
demonstrate.
mathematical question.
It is a
That's a question
mathematical
about the
question.
world.
Well, yeah.
That's
well,
like, are there 3 lions in the cave, or are there 2, or none,
it's
or
a math
whatever?
question.
That's
It's
not a math question at all.
Yeah, it's a question of what 1 lion plus 1 lion equals. Does it equal 2 lions or 3 lions?
No, you're conflating things, I think.
Okay, what am I?
Like, if there are lions in the cave, that's independent of any math facts of the world. We need a way to describe 2 lions, right? So we have the number 2 to say that there's 2 lions in there.
Okay, well let's get away from the numbers and stuff. So let's just talk about the lions. If I see 1 lion go in at 3 o'clock and I see another lion going at 4 o'clock,
Right.
no lions
You can
come
be
out.
reasonably justified that there are 2 lions in there.
Now, would you say there's an objectively true claim about how many lions are in the cave?
Yes.
And that
There
I could be wrong in saying
0,
something
1,
different.
or 2. Yes.
But you wouldn't say that I could claim that unnecessary suffering is bad, and that that's true or false.
I think that's an assumption.
Okay, so you come across somebody who says suffering is good, and I'm going to inflict as much of it as I can on every person I come across.
Right.
You can't tell them they're wrong.
I would say he has a bad assumption.
Well, how's it bad? Why is the assumption bad?
Why is the assumption bad?
Different assumption than the one you made.
If he's assuming that suffering, well, that's all I'm trying to get at is that it is an assumption. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not like suffering is good or suffering is bad. I don't think I think those are assumptions. I don't think those are claims, like facts.
But you just said that the guy who goes around saying that suffering is good would be working under a bad assumption.
Right.
How
That
can
was
you say
incorrect
that?
for me to say.
Okay. So it's an equally valid assumption.
I would say it's an assumption. That's the point I'm trying to get at. Like, suffering is bad is an assumption.
But so is that that 1 line plus 1 line equals 2 lions. That is also an assumption. There are a lot of assumptions going on.
I'm not assuming. Okay, so there are assumptions there. I'm assuming, for one, that lions exist, and I'm assuming that we have like basic arithmetic.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and from there we can go look at the world, go look at the cave and see how many lions are there. My assumptions are that lions exist and that we have arithmetic. It's not like that lions are in the cave. That there's no assumption that lions are in the cave.
Well, you're also assuming they don't like spontaneously. You're also assuming that lions don't spontaneously generate out of thin
Yeah,
air.
or disappear or something like
and all
that. Like, there's
So many
some underlying assumptions.
Why are
Yeah.
these assumptions justified, and the assumption that suffering is bad
I
not
don't.
justified?
I'm not saying they're justified. I'm just saying they are assumptions.
So then how can you say it's objectively true when it's built on all these assumptions, and then say morality is not objective? Either of them. So how can you say that that there's an objectively true claim about how many lions are in the cave?
Okay, so given that lions exist,
Mm-hmm.
and arithmetic.
Yep.
Yes. Those are my assumptions. Lions exist, caves exist, and we have arithmetic. If I go to it, if I go into a cave, there will be some number of lions in there, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, however many you want. Right. My assumptions were that lions exist and that we have like arithmetic or something like that. Like, those are my assumptions. When we're talking about morality, we're going to assume that suffering is bad, right? And then from those assumptions, we build our framework.
We can build
truth statements. Like, we can say,
on this
when I punch you in the face, like, that's wrong because of our underlying assumption that suffering is bad, right? Assuming suffering is bad, punching people in the face is objectively wrong.
And that assumption is a justified
I
one.
don't know if the assumption is justified, but the claim that punching people in the face is wrong is justified given the assumption that suffering is bad.
Maybe I feel like we're so close. I'm saying that you have to make some assumptions to figure out the lions thing and that there's an objectively true thing. And I'm saying morality works the same way. You have the assumption. I'm saying that the assumption that suffering is bad is justified, just like the assumption that lions exist and caves exist and all these other ones as well. I'm saying they're on the same playing field for me.
Well, I'm willing to accept that suffering is bad as an assumption. That's just all I want to get at, is that it is an assumption. I'm not saying that like suffering is bad is a truth claim. I think it's an assumption.
Yeah.
Like I could be wrong and suffering could be good, right?
You could also be wrong about how arithmetic works and how lions exist or not.
Yeah, but assuming lions exist and assuming we have arithmetic, there's an objective fact of the matter. There is either one or two lions in the cave or none or however many. And that's assuming that we have lions and math. And so assuming we have suffering, you can say certain actions are good and bad, and a bad action would be one that creates suffering because we've assumed that suffering is bad.
So is saying that murder is wrong given that suffering is bad claim is on the same truth level as there are X lions in that cave given these assumptions about math and such. Are they not on the same level?
Well,
Because to me,
let's
they're
say
on the same
torture
level.
because it's a little bit closer to like suffering.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
like say
True.
so yes. So given the assumption that that suffering is bad, it is a true claim that torture is wrong. Like you should not torture. That's a truth claim. Yes, given the assumption that suffering is bad. Yes. Torturing people is wrong and you should not do that. And I am justified in judging you when you do torture somebody. Right. But we have to get at bottom what our assumptions are.
Of course. So do we agree then that
I'm not sure. I don't know if we agree. Do you think suffering is bad? My view, that's an assumption. Do you think that's a fact? Like, is it a fact of the matter
no,
or
it's an
not?
assumption, but to me, it's an assumption that is just as justified as many of the assumptions we use for things like math. Things
I
that
think
we
it's a
would
good assumption.
Yeah.
Yes. It makes sense to me because whenever I feel pain and suffering, I shy away from it. I don't want it. Right.
And I would say like accepting the law of non contradiction.
Right.
That
If A does not equal B, A equals B. You can't say that.
that's an assumption. And I think that assumption is on par with the suffering is bad
Right.
assumption.
So I'm fine with saying that suffering is bad is an assumption. Is a good assumption to work your moral frameworks
Yeah.
off of.
Yeah. And okay. So
But I do want to stress that I do think it is nothing but an assumption. I don't think that there's like a fact.
Can you give me a fact, an objective fact that does not rely on any assumptions?
A fact. That's a hard one. The universe exists or something like that. I exist.
So would you say nothing's objectively true outside of that?
Nothing. No. I think there's definitely true things.
Okay. So have you shifted on this? Do you agree that there are objective morals?
I think given a certain set of assumptions, there are objectively right and wrong claims or actions or something like that.
Would you say the exact same thing about math?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that morality in principle is likely just as objective as math?
Not in the same way.
How are they different?
One way that they're different is that morality or ethics is very human central, whereas I do not think mathematics is.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That is you need minds to work with morality because that's what it's all about. How minds like ours should act. But the real thing I'm getting at is that when I call morality objective, when I say that they're objectively true morals, I'm saying that given this justified assumption, true and false things follow that are true and false outside of everyone else. And I look at math in the exact same way, where given these certain assumptions that are justified, there are true and false things that people can be right and wrong about.
Right. So what I'm thinking, okay, maybe this will help. So if I am some super advanced alien species and I see a pair of asteroids floating in space, like there are 2 asteroids floating in space, and that's just like the fact of the matter. So we're this super advanced alien species, and we go to Earth or some Earth-like planet, and we see creatures on them, perhaps like torturing one another or something like that. The fact of the matter is that the creatures are torturing one another. So given the assumption that suffering is bad, I can say that what they're doing is wrong. The fact of the matter doesn't give me much in ways of saying whether it's right or wrong. It's all within like my assumptions, right? Whereas with the 2 asteroids, no matter what like my assumptions are, like there's 2 asteroids there. That's just like it's the fact of the matter. Whereas like when it comes to like other people or other beings torturing each other, that is the fact of the matter. Now we can say that's right or wrong only under the assumption that suffering is bad. We couldn't say it's objectively right or wrong.
That's a really good analogy. That helps. 2 responses. One of them's kind of weird. One of them's more intuitive. I'll do the weird one first, just because it's kind of fun. It is possible that there's alien life significantly more intelligent than us, and they might have actually better assumptions about math than we do, and it's possible that we're wrong about there being 2 asteroids. That's possible. I'm gonna ignore that though. That's
Right.
mostly just for fun.
Okay.
But my more intuitive claim would be something like, they are different truth claims, the mathematics and the suffering, because the suffering, it's one of those objective truth claims I was talking about that relates to subjective experience, where mathematics is not, it's an objective claim about an objective thing, not a objective claim about a subjective thing. So the suffering is bad is only relevant to creatures with minds like ours. So if we came across aliens with very different minds, then we probably couldn't convince them of our morality.
They would see facts of the matter. They would see us like our actions in the world and how we move around it. But it would be hard to say like to convince them whether like certain actions are right or wrong. Yeah.
If they were rational creatures,
Mm-hmm.
in the way we are, I would think that even if they had significantly different minds and different ideas of morality, we'd be able to explain our assumptions and how they're justified, and they would at least be able to understand the objectiveness of our morality.
That seems reasonable.
So
Yeah.
I think we more or less agree on the objective state of morality. I think maybe you're just hesitant to call it objective because it is a different, it because the term objective is slippery, and you're thinking of,
So whenever we go back to the way beginning of the podcast when I was asking about objectivity and what's real, this is exactly what I was trying to get at earlier. So I would say like so like claims of physics equations are objective and they're also real. Like F equals ma is objective. Like it's independent of whether I think it's true or not, but it's also true in the world. If I apply a force to some mass, it will accelerate at some given amount or whatever. So I think those are objective and real. Whereas like I think moral claims are simply objective. I don't think they're like real or substantiated in the universe in the same kind of way.
I actually completely agree. I don't think there's any like fabric of the universe where the objectivity is stored. If there were no humans, if there were no creatures with minds like ours, there would be no morality. It's
right, or it would be something else.
But
right?
mathematic principles would still apply to the universe. As far as I can
certainly
tell.
seems that way.
Like I said, the alien thing, it is possible our mathematic assumptions are off.
Right.
But we just can't work under assumptions like that because we just can't function.
Yeah. Because like as far as like the history of science and mathematics, we've only built. We haven't like whenever we discover something new, we don't take like what we previously thought. We essentially build on top of it, right? And so we've been building up this whole time, and if we take out the bottom, then we're just it all falls down,
We
right?
just, even if
So
that's possible, we just can't do
right. But I
it.
think when it comes to like morality or something, I think we should always constantly be looking at our baseline assumptions, like what's at bottom. Like, and I think we could easily be wrong on that. It doesn't seem like it. It seems to me true that suffering is bad, and I feel reasonably justified in saying that. But I that is still an
No,
assumption, right?
you're right, and it is, and I agree that it's something that should be questioned more because we're trying to make objective claims about subjective experience. There's so much room for error during that transition. We can be really wrong about how we feel and what we think. We should question it more so than we should question like the fundamental laws of logic because we can't get anywhere doing that.
Right. Unless you, I'm sure people have tried.
You should. It's worth trying and it's worth like considering for sure, but just you can't you can't spend too much time on it because you won't get anywhere. I think we more or less agree, and I think our actual answer to is morality objective is sort of depends on what you mean by objective.
Right. And yeah, that was the problem with at the beginning that I knew we were going to get at, and prepping for this is getting bogged down in definitions. And but that's like part of philosophy, like you gotta know first of all what the words you're saying actually mean in order to like even say anything. And that's one of the things that makes philosophy so hard. But yeah, whenever it comes to the question, is morality objective? I do think it is objective, but I don't think it's real in the sense that like physics is real.
Yeah, I liked your alien asteroid ethics analogy. I think that illustrates your real versus. I was really fuzzy on what you meant by that at first, but that
Hmm.
makes I got you.
Right. Yeah. So real and objective are the keywords there. They're really closely tied together, but not the same. Right. That's why we have different words
Yeah.
for them.
When I was growing up, for the most part, I did believe in objective morals, but it was a different sort of objectivity.
I think our moral intuitions do grow and change as we grow and change. Right. They're not set in stone. I think you do develop your moral intuitions as you live
Of
life.
course. And as a society, as we've
Hmm.
progressed and
I think there
changed.
are some like baseline moral intuitions that you're given just because you're a human and it's like baked into our genetics. But then there are other moral intuitions like from your society and culture and your people around you that help you also develop.
Yeah, you can look cross culturally to find some of those. So like, don't kill your brother, don't cheat on your spouse. Some version of the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do to you. You can find those in every culture.
Yeah.
With
Hmm.
I don't think there's any exception. There might be a one or two just because humans can be kind of weird, but it's
Yeah. That's true.
staggeringly universal. Where did you start? Like the first time you thought about morality, where were you? Like on the spectrum of objective, anti-objective,
That's
relative?
interesting question. I didn't really honestly start thinking about morality like heavily because before I came to college, I definitely listened to like a lot of Jordan Peterson, for instance, a lot of like self help stuff, I guess you could say, like just ways in which I could make myself better. And then, like, in some sense, that's trying to develop my morality and the ways I should be in the world. But it wasn't really until I got to college and I started taking these philosophy classes and had a bit of guidance on what humans over the last few thousand years have actually said about these things, and especially the smartest of philosophers and whatnot over the past few hundred years have actually looked at some of these questions that we ask ourselves every day, and they have reasonable justifications for each. So I think that I didn't a whole lot of thought before college, but as soon as I was introduced to it, I was immediately, I think, pulled or gripped by the idea of a moral realism or something, kind of not quite what I was saying earlier, where moral facts are objective but not real. I probably would have said that they are both objective and real.
Like even if nobody's here, murder's wrong.
Yes, yes. I think I would have said something like that. Where I'm more cautious of saying something like that now.
Right. When you were at that stage, there are two ways to break down the objective morals. You have the consequentialism, which is there's an objective right or wrong answer based on the consequences, and then the deontology, which is like your duty ethics, like that which can be properly universalized. Where would you be in that?
Right, right. So whenever I was in the realism camp, I guess you could call it, I was definitely more on the deontology. So my thoughts were, while consequences did matter, I was more with Kant on this. It was the action itself that was substantial. It wasn't the consequence of the action. It was the action in it of itself that was good or bad. That's where my intuitions lied at the time.
You said you listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson. I know he's big on that, like duty
Yeah,
and
he's definitely heavy on
taking responsibility.
deontology. He would be more. I think he's more in like the. I would say pretty close to me, or I would say I'm probably pretty close to him, seeing as it's been. I've listened to a lot of him, and He's influenced me way heavier than I've influenced him. Right.
Yeah, probably.
He's definitely, so he's done a lot of reading in like existential thought as well, and I think he's definitely moved by that, like I am. And when it comes to like morality and existentialism, the existentialists are they talk about the best way or what it means to be a human, essentially, like what, like given some brute facts about our existence, we're here, and say like the absurdity of the universe and such, like where can you find meaning, or what does it even mean to like exist here? And nested within that are questions of like morality. Why am I here in the first place? And then like, now that I'm here, how ought I act in the world, or something like that.
I've thought about this stuff for a really long time. When I was young, growing up, though, I don't think I thought about it too hard, or at least I didn't research into it. It was just sort of like I was raised Christian, sort fundamentalist Christian, actually, really strict to the Bible, and to me, moral and good was like acting in accordance with the teachings of Jesus.
Yep, that makes sense.
And I mean, it works as a shortcut, but there are some really good arguments against that sort of morality, even if you are religious. Plato, are you familiar with his like objection to this sort of morality?
No.
He
Well, maybe
you
describe it.
you probably recognize it as soon as I say it, but are things good because God commands it, or does God command things which are good?
Yeah, this gets to the Euthyphro. Whenever you take a philosophy class, it's one of the first stories you're introduced to is Plato's Euthyphro, and they're talking about, like you said, is something good because God said it's good, or God says it's, or how did you phrase it again?
Is an action good because God says it's good, or does God will an action because it's good? It's like if God said to do something like commit a holocaust, is that a moral thing to do because God said so? Or is there a standard of good that exists outside of God and God only chooses to will from that?
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
And that's a pretty big dilemma because it's like, well, either morality is sort of relative in this sense where anything God says goes. If God says to kill your brother, treat everyone horribly, make everyone suffer, if God said that, that would suddenly be the moral thing to do, and that would be pretty weird, unintuitive.
That very unintuitive, I
Some people
think.
do hold to that view, but and then you have the there's a standard of good, and God wouldn't order a holocaust because it's not in his nature, because he's omni good, which means that there's a standard outside of God. A lot of people don't think about that. But once you think about that, you have to suddenly start looking at morality outside of the scriptures to get to something. I moved to a hardcore moral relativism, or almost probably nihilism, actually. More like nothing matters, there's no good, no bad. It's just matter in motion.
Nihilism that's a tough one, because it's real gripping whenever you start with it.
Well, it's so easy.
It's so easy. Yep. And I think existentialism is a good counter to nihilism.
After I stayed there for a while, I tried to make things work for that. But you really, when you try to take that framework and apply it to life, You just not only is it miserable, but also it just doesn't work very well. You get some really big absurdities. It doesn't make sense of a lot of our things. And
If you take the view of a moral relativist, you can't really judge other cultures, right? You can't judge North Korea for concentration camps and starving their people or whatever, because like whatever they're doing is relative to like to them over there, right? And that's my biggest problem with moral relativism is you're not really allowed to make these sort of objections to what to me seems pretty immediately obviously wrong, right?
what was really interesting is once I was in this like moral relativism period, this was when you were in your moral realism Kantian sort of period, and I remember having some interesting arguments with you, and you would talk about the objectivity. I'd be like, "That's ridiculous, that's stupid." Da, da, da. It's funny how we both kind of converged on something more similar now.
Mhm.
It's crazy thinking back to some of those holding some of those positions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you really gotta let your intuitions grow and develop and change. If they don't, you're assuming that you got it all right.
Yeah, you should always be questioning your underlying assumptions, like you said.
hmm And especially when it comes to stuff like morality, because like in some sense, it's one of the most important things you can do here on planet Earth as a human. Like in this world we live in, is to be a moral person. Like why? What greater good could there even be? Like essentially.
Yeah, I mean it really is what all we care about. Even if people don't know that they care about it, it really is all you can care about. How your consciousness is and whether it's in a positive state or a negative state, built on this assumption of suffering being bad and among others. Even if you believe in like an afterlife or nirvana, anything like that, if you believe in anything like that, you're still concerned with like the conscious state of your eternal self. It and your morality
hmm
is completely tied in with that.
Yep. Exactly.
There's just no getting away from it. For me, it was just meditating on the state of like our minds and learning about like how our brains work and just really thinking about what it means to do good and bad things. Also learning coming to the reason that there's no reason I should value my experience over another
That's
necessarily.
a reasonable assumption on the
It's
face
hard
of
to
it.
justify at least like only caring about yourself. The more you like really think about it, you really think about what's going on with you and what's going on with other people. There's not really, as far as I can tell, like
Mhm.
philosophical
Well,
grounds.
just the only way I could think about it is just some sort of like self-preservation type thing. You can't experience reality if you're not here, right? Obviously, so you should treat yourself with some sort of you are central to your experience, right?
Yeah, but here's the weird thing is even if you take a completely selfish approach, like I'm going to make things as good as me for as possible, I find given the nature of our minds that that often means being benevolent and
Yeah, to make
caring.
things as good as possible for you, in my view, that involves making the world a better place, like overall, right?
There's lots of evidence actually to support this sort of claim. You give people $20 on the street, and you tell them to go buy themselves something, and you talk to them later, and you ask them how they felt, how happy it made them. You do the same experiment on another population. You give them $20, you say, "Go buy something for someone else and give it to them." Reliably and testably, like the group that gives the money is happier. They report higher happiness throughout the day.
It definitely feels good.
I want to keep going on actually, but we really should wrap it up. We'll do episodes on
hmm
these moral
Yeah,
theories.
that's the thing about philosophy. You can just go on and on and on.
I'm glad we do have some sort of agreement though on the morality question, and yeah, I look forward to doing more.
A little bit tricky to figure that one out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's the first time we've ever agreed on this question, so
Right.
that's cool. That's exciting. I think, or cause for concern. I don't know. We'll find out. I guess.
Just keep a check on your credences.
Yeah.
Let them change if you're presented with new information.
Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Let us know what you think of our positions and your own positions, and we'd love to hear from you.